Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 30, the big 3-0 of the Fifth Meeple Board Game Podcast. We are a group of diverse friends who offer our takes on the latest and greatest board games to hit our table here. I'm your host, Daniela, the goofy noob, and I'm joined today by the collector.
Hey, this is David.
The intellectual introvert.
Hi, everyone. This is Chris.
And the deluxeifier.
Hello, it's Pete.
Okay, guys, in today's episode, we dive into two games that really put the work in networking. We'll start today in the middle of the British Industrial Revolution, producing pottery, crafting cotton, and bartering with beer as we break down brass Birmingham. Then we'll keep our energy up by heading to Saxony, combusting coal, and busting atoms as we spend a half a life exploring Nucleum. And finally, because we can just not help ourselves, we'll decide which one we want to bring into our network by pitting them against each other in our ultimate Showdown, the Battle of the Funnest. But as always, before we even begin this, we're going to start with a topic of discussion. David, take it away.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about different topics here on this show, but the topic we're going to talk about today is another, do you look for this when you buy a game? And this is specifically, do you look for a solo mode when you buy a game? Is that important to you when you're looking for something? I recently saw Stonemaier was doing, they basically took over Takedo. If anybody knows that game that's been out there, they took it over from Fun Factors. I don't know the exact name of that company, but it was just recently announced, I think even today, Jamie put something up there, but they were going to make a solo mode or an Automa mode for that. That was going to be official when they re-released the game, their version of the game here next year in February. So I was just curious because when I was reading the comments, a lot of people were like, yeah, this is something I'm really looking forward to. Does it affect the way you guys buy games as far as, you know, if there's not a solo mode, you're less inclined to purchase something versus if there is a solo mode included in the game?
I don't mind if there's a solo mode in the game. I usually use that to learn the game if I'm going to teach it first. But I usually don't play solo games. Unlike Chris, I think he plays a whole lot more than I do solo-wise. So I really don't mind if it's in there, but it's not something that I actively look for or it's a make or break for me.
I am probably never going to buy a solo mode game. For me, gaming is this thing that I come to, and I really look forward to the camaraderie and really learning, and I want to play with other people. So for me to just pull out a game, and I know I have Merchants, which has a solo mode in it too, but I've never played it. I really am not interested in that type of gaming.
Yeah, for me, as Pete said, I play a lot by myself. I don't necessarily play a lot of the solo modes of a lot of the games, though. If I'm playing by myself, a lot of times I'm playing a 2 or 3 player game, and I'm just taking on the role of all 2 or 3 of those players. However, there are some solo modes that I like and some that I don't. You mentioned Automa. I appreciate an Automa. So if I'm playing the same game, but I'm able to play against something else that is just, you know, actually moving things around and acting like another player, I appreciate that. Gaia Project does an excellent job with its Automa of making it feel like you are playing another player. And it does it well enough to the point where you can have a 3-player game where 2 of you are real, one of them's an Automa. That works really, really well. I thought Lost Ruins of Arnak did really well with their Automa or their solo mode. If it's a solo mode that really isn't the same as the base game, and it's like, yeah, here's the solo mode version, and it's totally different, I'm not a big fan of that. But if you can make me feel like I'm playing an actual game, I can really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, because, I mean, one of the games we're going to talk about tonight is Brass Birmingham. It is the #1 rated game, you know, on BGG of all time, and it does not have a solo mode, you know. Part of it goes to, you know, the game we're comparing to, you know, they do include a solo mode, and you see this happening more and more kind of as games come out. But I think personally, I actually buy some games now for just one player. You know, I have a couple of games on my shelf that only play one because I think of it more as a solitaire. You know, if people are playing solitaire on the computers or free cell, that's kind of where I take those kind of games at. But I don't really sit and play solo modes kind of like Chris does. One of the only games I've actually ever played the solo mode on is Arc Nova and Nucleum. So it's interesting that one of them is tonight's topic. But yeah, just curious to see if that affects the way you play or you purchase games.
All right, David. So those are our thoughts on solo mode games and solo games, but we'd like to know what you guys all think about that today. Let us know by sending us an email at thefifthmeeple@gmail.com. We'd love to have you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or on BGG, or check out our website at thefifthmeeple.com. And before you forget, why not take a second to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a show?
And if you want to help us grow, one of the best ways is to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. In fact, we recently received another 5-star review from Leighton McQueen titled My Number 1B Podcast that we wanted to share with our listeners. And this is what he had to say. It says, "This is my 1B for my favorite podcast. BGHT is 1A. The hosts are great with valuable insights. They have convinced me to try and buy a few games based on their opinions. I love that they tell you the current costs as well as ways to deluxify your copy. Currently working my way through the catalog. Keep up the great work." So thank you for that review, Lightning McQueen.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I always enjoy seeing and hearing people that enjoy our podcast, but if they're buying games based on what we said, hopefully they still like them, right? So I'd be curious to know. I mean, it ended up being a 5-star review, so I assume that means and when they got them, they liked them. So
Yeah, maybe halfway through the catalog, we'll see what happens. Keep us posted, though.
you get another one. What happened?
Yeah, thanks for the post.
Brass Birmingham is a 2 to 4 player hand management, network, and route building game set during the Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries. As competing entrepreneurs, players must develop, build, and establish their industries across 2 eras to exploit the varying market demands. Players start their turns with a hand of cards, each showing either a city or one of 6 industries. You take 2 actions per turn, discarding a card from your hand for each action. The build action allows you to place an industry tile from your player board onto the main board as long as the card you discard either matches the location or industry you're playing. If playing an industry card, the location must be part of your network, and the tiles also carry a cost of money and, often, consuming iron or coal from the board's shared economy. These industry tiles don't score points until they're flipped, which occurs when all of the resources are consumed for iron, coal, and beer, or when sold for cotton, pottery, and manufactured goods. Rather than building, you can instead use your action to take a loan, expand your network, develop higher levels of technology, sell your goods, or gain wildcards. After each player has taken their turn, players take income determined by the tiles they flipped and determine the next round's order with the player who spent the least money playing first. When the cards run out, the canal era ends and players score points for their flipped tiles. The board is then partially reset for the rail era, and when the rail era ends, so does the game. The player who has amassed the most points wins the game, gets to shower off the coal dust, and enjoys a beer. Brass Birmingham was designed by Gavin Brown, David Forrest, and Martin Wallace, and was first published in 2018 by Roxley.
All right, Chris, thanks for that introduction. So let's get on to talking about Brass. I'm actually going to take a back seat to this today because I played Brass probably over a year ago, and I've only played Nucleum once. So let's hear it, guys. Let's talk about Brass. What are some of the things that you guys really enjoy about this game? I know in our previous episode, you guys have really touched on this is one of the top 5 games for a lot of you guys, and you really enjoy it. So really super interested to hear about this game from you guys and hopefully get it to the table again.
I really appreciate that the game when you play it has 2 eras, the canal era and then the rail era. And I really enjoy the interaction in my mind between that first era and the second era. I think it's fun. I think it's fascinating. And when you play the game, most of the points are coming in that second era. But I really feel like the amount of points you're really going to get depends on how well you set yourself up in that first era, or at least you certainly can set yourself up for a much better game. That's happening in the first era, even though most of the points in the second era. And that there's that reset, but some things stay behind after the first era into the second. How well did you set yourself up? How are you going to leverage that? I think that's a really enjoyable part of the game. And again, a puzzle that isn't always easy to solve and is going to be changed when you got your eye on a spot and Pete's like, oh yeah, I'm going down there to exactly the spot that I wanted to go.
You know I am. Yeah, one of the things that I enjoy about the game is, and I'll use the phrase communal resources, because this is a game where you need to use each other's resources, or you want to use each other's resources really to leverage your plays. And because you don't want to take a turn to put the resource out, then take a turn to use those resources, you want to share those. So that interaction through the game, I think, is really what brings it to life to me. That again, you're trying to build something. I know Chris wants something. Well, you know what? I'll just build that. Let him take those resources. It's a win-win for both of us. So you're trying to work with everybody around the table, but you're also fighting a little bit for those spots. And being able to, have that back and forth. How many times has beer been stolen? Yeah. I think it's a really unique game. And the last game that I actually played, I played with somebody who was a lot better than me. I've played this game a lot, and he really just crushed us because I think there were strategies that I never even scratched on yet. I mean, he was building beer where we couldn't get to it. And in the game, you can share resources for the coal. You can share resources for the iron that's out there and the beer, but in different situations, you have to be connected to rails, or you don't have to be connected to the rails, or you have to have pathways. So that to me is really what makes the game run for me and really makes it engaging and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you guys forgot to mention one of the greatest things about this game. You could take loans, on your turn. Any game that you can take loans is a game that I personally like, especially an economic game, because it gives you freedom and kind of leverage within that system to make things happen where maybe other people can't see it. Kind of like Chris was saying, are you going to set yourself up for future rounds, or are you going to try to do stuff here and grab points now? And I feel like the more you play this game, the more you see all the different things that you can do in Era 1 that will set you up for success in Era 2. But at the same time, you're trying, like Pete said, you're trying to work with people, but at the same time trying to screw them over just a little bit more than you get screwed over so that you can win the game. And I think that, to me, just playing this game all the time with people that know how to play the game is something that I really like, because I think it all comes down to, like, every game is just so different just based off the people that are at that table. I don't know if you guys have experienced that same thing, but to me, it's the player interaction is very high, but it's not dirty like some games where it's not like a take that action.
It can be.
It can be, but to me, it's not as much of a here's a really take that. There's set amount of turns. You know what you're gonna do. You can little bit screw somebody over, like a take that move, but it's not necessarily like a super like you're taking something away from them. It's more of like you're putting things out there to hamper them or to do a move so that they have to do something else, but you're always benefiting. I don't know if there's a lot of hate drafting as much in this game as like you would see in other games where you're just doing moves to screw other people over.
Yeah, I think people can do that, but I also think sometimes that you might do it because, hey, I didn't have a choice. Yeah. Right, so going back, I guess I'll comment first real quickly on the loans. That I think unless you had some amazing start, if you're not taking out loans, you're probably hampering yourself, right? If you're trying, I'm going to wait as long as I can till I take a loan. I think you want to take a loan at the right point in time, not necessarily at the latest possible time. And you can really be hurting yourself by trying to avoid taking loans, and then you're not getting yourself set up. Now, to the other point you made with respect to take that's and all that, I do think it's kind of interesting. Some of the decisions you can make. Maybe you have your own beer that's sitting there, but no one else can get at it, and you're always going to get to it. And so you're going to take somebody else's beer because you can see they're about to make a power move. And if you take that beer, they can't do it, and they got to take another couple of turns. And you don't get all that many turns in here. There's a lot going on. Yeah. But in reality, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm almost out of cards. This era is ending already. And so if someone does something to where, okay, now it's going to take you an extra turn to do something, it can really, really be crippling. And all of a sudden, everything you had planned out that your head is pounding on because you finally figured it out, now you got to start over.
Yeah.
And that can be crippling, but in either fun or frustrating, depending.
Yeah, the thing they mentioned about turns is really a big part of this game too, because there are times where you want to go first and there's times where you get stuck going last, and being able to take out a loan is really like a no cost action. And the less money that you spend, the higher up you go in that player order, and that can make a huge difference. There's a lot of times when I'm playing this game and I'm asking David, how much do you got in there? What is it, 8 or 9? And you're looking at how can I trim off a point or two, and will that still work in your strategy? So that player order can really make or break you as well. And having those, as you said, there is a fixed number of turns in this game. I forget exactly what it is, 13 or something like that, but 13 per era. I forget the exact.
I think it depends on player count. It changes a little bit, but it's not many.
Yeah. So you're trying to get every little bit out. And another part of the game is just the timing of things. When that era starts coming up to the end of that era, you're really trying to squeak out as many points as you can, try to flip over what you can, and just make the most of everything that you got.
Yeah, kind of like what Pete was saying. There's a lot of like nuance to this game, and there's a lot of different things. I call them kind of like almost mini games within the game itself that are playing itself out on the board in real time, and you have to always make a decision on what you want to do. Kind of like what Pete was saying. Is it better that I get turn order because I take out a loan this round? Even with the multi-use cards that you get, am I going to play this for this city, or am I going to play this because if I don't play this card in this city, there's only 2 things there, and somebody else might just jump in because they have the production or whatever the card they need to just go automatically into any of those coal mines or any of the factories. They could just automatically build in that space. And I think the decision with the cards, especially the cities and stuff that you get, is always fascinating to me. It's always a hard decision too, I think, of, there's not necessarily a right answer, but it's excruciating sometimes because you're on a razor's edge, but you always are hedging your bets on what the other players are going to do. That always enters my mind when I'm playing my own position, which I think is a good thing in a game because I'm always hyper aware of what is Chris going to do, what is Pete going to do, what's actually advantageous, what are the odds that they're going to come in here and take my stuff.
I was just going to say on the card play, that's really a big part of it for me too, because as you said, there's multi-use cards on there. You could either go to a location or you can actually do the function that it is, whether it's build a mine or whatever. But the nice thing about the game too is sometimes you've got cards which feel like they're dead, and they're never really dead because in order to take an action, you do have to spend a card. Sometimes that makes the decision space a lot easier where I have this card, I know I'm not going to use it at all, so now I can spend it to take a loan out, or I can spend it and maybe build out my rail system or my canals. And I think that really makes that card play very interesting.
Yeah, I agree, but I find more often it's the opposite, to where I don't really have a card that I can just throw away. It does certainly happen. You say, okay, now I know this card is the one I'm going to just kind of spend for nothing, so to speak. But more often than not, again, multi-use cards, relatively simple. It's either a location or a good, a resource. But that just simple decision is so excruciating.
It is.
Because, again, it's so tight, and you got to squeeze as much as you can. And then a lot of times, okay, you've got in your hand, you know what you're going to do. You're not getting any more cards towards the end of an era, and then again, someone takes your beer, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I set myself up, and now I got to figure it all back out again." And there's flexibility in those multi-use cards, but not much. And I think it makes for a really interesting and fun game, even though it can be excruciating at times.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So it sounds like we're going to talk about the things that flatten your beer in this game. What are some of the things maybe that either frustrate you in this game, or just something you'd like to see maybe brushed up on, or just flow a little better?
The killer for me on this game is really the setup. It's not brutal, but it's getting those tokens all in order and on your player board so you can actually play the game. It does take a little bit of setup, but it's not super painful. That's probably the biggest gripe that I have about the game. I think it's ripe, and I know there's a lot of options out there to 3D print, holders and storage systems. I really need my buddy Bob, please help me out here. Create that holding system where I can actually store the game and bring it out and then set it up and play it quickly. It's not, again, real time consuming to set up, but it does take a little time.
When you're playing a 3-player game by yourself and you're setting all 3 of them up, it takes a lot of time. So
it does, yeah.
I'll also say it seems to me that I think there is maybe not an always win, but I feel like cotton is the way that if you're going cotton and you can make it work, you've got a pretty good chance of winning. It's not a guarantee, but I do feel like usually people are trying to get into the cotton. If you can get a good position for that, you're probably going to be in a pretty good position to win the game. Conversely, and again, this may be where the better players like, no, you can use this. I want to hear how somebody makes pottery work, because I feel like whenever I'm using pottery, it's okay, I got nothing else to do. I can get this one-time bang out of the pottery, and that's about it. So I'm curious to hear from other folks if they've said, oh yeah, no, pottery is the way to go. Because for me, I'm always trying to get cotton, and I'm going other ways only if I have to.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chris. I think, I feel the same way, so maybe my level isn't just as high as other people's level on this game, but I think we play at a high level, so I feel the same a little bit with Chris is what he's saying. But also, I know this is kind of a critique, and I don't really care about graphics or anything like that, but I just think that the board itself is still a little bit bland. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell. It's just kind of dark. I know there's 2 different sides to it, but for me, I wish it was just a little bit brighter. I still feel like I'm playing a board game that's made back in like 1990s still with the color scheme. So I wish it was just a little bit brighter and sat better at the table.
And I can't decide. So it's a double-sided board, but the boards are literally the same except one's the night and one's the day. And I can't decide, was that cool that they at least gave you 2 things to play with, or is it like, they're trying to make you think you got another board, but you really don't, right? It's just the same board. It's not another way to play it. It's just, okay, here, more light, but it's really not. I feel like the start of the second era can be a little slow. I'm curious if you guys feel that way, or hey, that's just part of the game. But I always feel like that those first couple turns, you're like, I'm not connected to anything. And because everything's wiped away, I think for me at least, it's difficult to set yourself up. But then we also tend to get maybe it's just our group into okay, someone gets halfway through a turn and like, oh, I can't, I don't have coal, and I got to start all over again. But I feel like that, hey, that you're halfway through the game and you are starting over, but it's a slow start over until you get a little bit of your network going on. For me, that's just a little bit of a negative. It's not the end of the world, but I feel like that's a little bit of a downer when okay, now we're going slow again before we go fast.
Yeah, the other thing that I would say in the game that's a little negative is there could be a little AP in the game, analysis paralysis, as you're trying to figure out what's the best move. And I see that more at the end of the game when you're really trying to squeak out that last point or two. Am I going to be able to flip this over? Am I going to be able to use somebody's beer to maybe make a sale? That's one of the downsides to me, and I think, as you get closer to the end of the game, I kind of wish it was hidden information. I just feel like I wasn't trying to eke out the last bit that I can on my last turn. I know as you're scoring, you really don't know what it's going to be at the very end, but when you're looking for every point and scratching for every bit, it's just a lot, and I think we can get lost in trying to get that 2 or 3 points that you might get.
And I mean, teaching this to somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience in board games, it's just not always the easiest teach. There's a lot that goes into it. I would say if Danielle's not commenting really, but I think if she was commenting with us here, which she's sitting right across from me, but this is not necessarily a noob's game to really get them involved in it. I feel like you have to know different mechanics from a lot of different board games, and this game will come together a lot faster. And I feel like if it's just a game you're like, oh, it's the #1 rated game, and this is what I'm going to play just because that's what board gamers are saying, I would say take a step back if this is the first game you're buying.
Yeah, this is almost a 4.0. It's a 387 weighting on BGG. It's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
I remember Barrage was heavier, so that was just...
I wouldn't recommend that one first either. I wouldn't recommend that one, period, but maybe we'll get to that someday.
All right, guys, I'm furiously taking notes and making sure that I do the cotton thing, whatever you guys are talking about. But I hope to get this game to the table. Final thoughts, though.
Yeah, I'm just going to go over pricing because I know some of you like to hear what the pricing is. And the pricing on this game has gone up. I was surprised when I looked this up how much this game was because when I bought it, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, it wasn't nearly this high. So it's going for $69.95 right now on Amazon. And, I was like, wow, that's really high. But I looked across the board, and even at some of our local board game stores, it's at $65. I think used, you can still get it between 40 and 50, but I'm seeing a lot more at the 50 now, not at the 40. So unless somebody just really hates this game, you're probably going to be closer to 50 even on the used market. And then I did see from Roxley itself, you can go on their website and you can buy this game for $95, and that's the deluxeified version with the clay chips that we like to play with, the iron clays in there, and that does include those. And part of me is like, as often as you play it, this is a game, it might be worth it for that $95. They also include some of the miniature barrels and some other stuff that's deluxeified, but I normally don't say that because I don't care as much, and I have Pete here next to me, so he's always deluxeifying everything, but those iron clays, I think, make a difference sometimes in how you play this. I don't know how it would feel like with just playing it normally because I'm always playing with chips.
Yeah, I enjoy the iron clays. If you get the chance, get them. They can be used in so many other games as well. Anything that uses coins from 1 to 500, it really works out well. I guess my comment is, if you did listen to our top 15, this is my number 2 game. So I really enjoy this. So I'm going to kind of give you an idea that I'm probably going to be liking this game quite a bit when you hear the Battle of the Funnest.
So Pete, you mentioned, or Dave mentioned the iron clays. Have you done anything else to bling this game up?
No, not yet. The components are actually pretty decent. I mean, the little cubes, I have looked online and I've considered getting, the ones that look a little bit more like coal and the ones that look a little bit more like iron. But quite honestly, I really haven't felt the need to get that. The barrels are, nice barrels. Everything else is the wood or the tokens. Now, I did, again, Bob, thank you. He did 3D print the trains and the boats for me, and I really think that helps with the gameplay. And to your point, you mentioned that the board looked a little dull and dirty. I think that really brings out the theme of that, because during that time it really was dingy and dirty, and I actually washed my boats and the trains to make them look like that filthy, dirty era. So that's just something to keep in mind. I agree with you that it's dark and kind of drab, but I think that's part of the flavor that comes through.
You've just offended our 19th century audience, though. That's the only thing. I asked you about the blinging it up because I printed a bunch of stuff out because I wanted to do something for brass. Like I'm looking at my games, what can I print for this? And there are a couple of things out on Thingiverse where, the way the game's designed, you just take your token and you put it on the board, on the square for the city. And this is like a building. So they have they have one that's supposed to be a cotton mill, one that's supposed to be a coal mine or whatever. So I printed some of those out. I actually haven't used them yet because I'm a little worried this is going to be more trouble than they are good. I don't know that it necessarily adds anything to it other than it puts a little 3D to it. But I'm curious to maybe try it out. But I don't have a lot of ideas myself for how you're going to bring this out. It is what it is, I think, in this case. I like this game as far as final thoughts. I think it deserves it's number one. I think it deserves number 2. I talked a couple shows ago. I think Gloomhaven should still be up there, and that battle of Gloomhaven versus Brass was a whole thing. But it's a really, really good game. I enjoy this every time I play it. I think that's it. It's a great game.
All right. Well, let's get out of this industrial revolution. You guys can hop in the shower, dust the coal off.
Nucleum is a 1 to 4 player hand management, network, and route building game set in an alternate timeline where the atomization of uranium has ushered in a new era of energy and prosperity. As competing industrialists, players must develop their networks, build and power buildings, and secure contracts using their unique technologies. Nucleum plays continuously with no set round structure. You start the game with a set of action tiles, each of which has 2 actions associated with it. Most of those also have a railway printed on the opposite side. On your turn, you will either play an action tile or recharge. When playing an action tile for its associated actions, you may be able to urbanize, placing buildings on the map within your network, industrialize, placing mines or turbines on your map, develop, purchasing additional action tiles, gain a contract which can yield points and special technologies, energize, consuming energy to flip building tiles for points and other benefits, or subsidize to gain workers or money, or to advance on one of 3 income tracks. Alternatively, you can place your action tile on the game board, expanding your network and potentially gaining the associated actions one more time. Whenever desired, players can instead choose to use their turn to recharge, retrieving all of their action tiles, gaining money, points, and workers from their income tracks, and placing a milestone marker based on the achievements they've accumulated, which will provide conditional points at the end of the game. The game ends when 2 or 3 specific conditions are met, depending on player count. Players score points from their energized buildings, milestones achieved, their technology board, their income tracks, and from leftover resources. The player with the most points wins the game and maintains a radioactive glow for the remainder of game night. Nucleum was designed by Simone Luciani and David Terzi and was published in 2023 by Board and Dice.
Well, Chris, thank you for that introduction to Nucleum. I have, again, played this game once a couple weeks ago. Very beautiful game. Let's talk about how this game is and some of the things that we enjoyed about this game.
I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is I think this game gives you a lot of freedom. I know we're comparing it to Brass earlier, but to me, this game just gives you a ton of freedom to the point where you can really hose yourself really early if you don't know what you're doing. I think kind of like you guys were talking about, Chris is, a really good teacher when we did the Elridge episode, kind of give you the pros and the cons of like your choices. I feel like on a first playthrough with this game, if you give pros and cons to some of the movements early, it'll help new players, because if not, they could really hamper themselves, because every action selection tile, even though I love the freedom that it gives me, I see other players, when I see them making moves early in this game, I know sometimes, in my gut that they're never going to be able to come back because they're giving away something to build a track, because your action selection tiles can also build track that they're actually going to need to do. And so I think that's a little bit difficult.
Yeah, the best part of the game is those action selection tiles, the way that they can be used for those resources or to buy, different items. I just think that's really good. That's the best thing about the game that I really like about it. I think that stands out. The rest of the game, I think is very vibrant. I enjoy that as well. We talked a little bit about Brass being dull and dingy. This one really does stand out. It's very appealing. It's also fairly large and takes up a lot of table space. So that's something to keep in mind with that. But I do really, really enjoy that action selection. And the way that it works is, you can take multiple actions, and then you have that regroup time. and you get more resources. And I think one of the downsides, or one thing that I would like to explore a little bit more, I really want to try to explore, getting up to a certain level and then just cash in, move the marker, and start over again. Because I think there's a tendency, and I don't know if it's one of those, dangle the carrot out there for too long. The farther you go, yeah, you're doing those actions, but you're losing when you pull back because you have a lot of empty space that you're really not gaining any resources. So I'd like to go back and tackle that and maybe come at the game from a different angle. I know we played it a couple times, but as I was going through in my mind, I thought that was something that I really wanted to try.
Yeah, you were telling me about that a week or so ago, and let me know how that turns out. Because I think it's somewhere. Probably you were talking about as soon as I get past my last marker, I'm gonna wipe him out. I feel like it's probably somewhere in between there, but I haven't played enough to know for sure. But I think you're right. Sometimes you can I got to squeeze one more out. I think there's a point where, okay, no more squeeze, but I don't think you want to pull that trigger too soon. But that's just me speculating. I haven't played it enough. David, you were talking about the actions, and Pete, you alluded to the fact that the same pieces that you use in order to get those actions are the ones you have to put on the board. And I think that's a really interesting decision of when do you put it. You have to build your network. You have to get those down on the board. And I agree, if you put them down too soon, you could end up hosing yourself. But you got to put them down at some point. And I feel like a lot of the games we've played, we've talked after the game, we should have built more networks. We should have shared the networks. And then we play the next game and we don't, because we're just not willing to part with what is potentially our only way to do certain things. And I think that's a really fun decision to make, and sometimes an agonizing one, of when you're going to put something down, or you need to make a connection. And even when you're putting it down, you're not optimizing it, because even when you put that rail down, you can get actions from it, but only under certain situations. And that can be an interesting challenge, and I think a fun decision to really battle with.
And kind of like, I'm going to say too, especially, when Pete was alluding to playing the game like a totally different way. I know I played this solo mode a couple times, and the solo mode, I might be playing around because I get killed. And and it's not even just killed. I mean, I get slaughtered. And, the automa that they have in there, it just keeps building at a rate where I'm like, I don't know how you actually beat this thing other than you're playing at like expert level. Because a lot of times when I try to play a game, especially if it's solo, is I'm trying to do it to test out things. And I feel like even when I play against the automa, I really can't test out things that I would like to test out unless I'm playing like Chris, multi-handed. And I feel like in this game, there's just so many decisions going on because it's so open that I have a hard time playing multi-handed in this version. So, that's just kind of my thing on that. But I like that the goal track. So there's one overarching goal track that's on the left-hand side of the board. And every time, like he was saying, that you reset, you bring in and you have to score where you're at with stars, right? And how much you get on that track. And it's kind of like, I heard it described on another show, and I thought they did a really good job describing this, is they said it was kind of like if you go to the circus and you're hitting the hammer like on the bell, and you're hitting it and it goes up a certain amount, and then you're like, I'm going to hit it harder next time, and you hit it harder, and then you get more stars and you progressively kind of climb that ladder. But I think the interesting decision space there is that when those goals come out, sometimes you're kind of building towards something, but you could actually put their multipliers on the left hand side, so you can actually get 2 multipliers onto each goal, just how the game is kind of built. But you have to sacrifice another goal multiplier in order to get 2 onto the same one. But I think an interesting strategy is sometimes it's not saying like, hey, I'm going to go for the one that's third highest, but you're going for the one that's second highest, and you're just going to surround as many stars as you can around that so that the multiplier is a lot higher, and then you're just going to base your strategy on that. I think that because the game is so open, that a lot of times we don't focus, I think, on maybe what we should be doing. We're just kind of doing a million things, and so therefore the scoring is really diluted versus honing in and focusing. And I think that just comes with plays of the game.
The one thing, though, that I would say in playing this game once is when we did the final scoring to that point is I went up on my personal tracks when you scored the money and the achievements and those 3 tracks at the top. And I was like, I'm going to max these out. I'm going to try and get a lot of points for that. And I was doing a couple other things. You guys really went out and did everything. And I would say for like this game, to me, it seemed like you really had to do everything. Get a lot of tiles out, get a lot of your energies and I don't know the names of all the different pieces that we're talking about, but it seemed like you had to know a little bit about something of all the different things and maximize them to the fullest. And maybe that's just, again, the first playthrough that we were doing, because that was like a learning time for a lot of us. But I remember, again, looking back at the scores, because I just thought like, oh, I'll do this, and this, and really max that out. And I was doing really well. And then I was like, oh, I just got smacked like at the end. So, but...
Yeah, I think that brings up another point, though, Daniela, is because I think the stuff that you were focusing on, sometimes I would be like, why is Daniela focusing on that? But then I realized that, we all play a little bit asymmetric, so we're all starting with different kind of powers and kind of how they work up. And so when I saw on your board kind of some of the stuff that you were working towards, it made more sense to me, because on my board, it was totally like energize buildings, build rails, do different things. And so I don't know. I don't know if I leaned into that as much as I should have, but... I kind of was basing it off of my experience with brasses, which is I was just looking for opportunities in the marketplace, and hopefully they aligned with my asymmetric power. But I do like that there's asymmetric powers in this game as well.
The other thing I would say, too, is, David, I don't remember what this part of the board was. I'm showing him a picture right now, like a total dork. What was that part?
That is like your own individual player board, or you got like a company board where you have asymmetric stuff.
Yeah, that stuff you really needed to, kind of what we were talking about like right now, but that I felt like I lacked in that. I was doing like 2 or 3. You guys all got to that bottom one that you really wanted to do, and I think that helped your guys' scores a lot, because it just helped you score a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of complexity in the game, especially when it comes to scoring. It is a very much a point salad at the end. We're trying to build something, and then I'm trying to keep in mind, well, how am I really going to score these buildings that I had? Do I need to be connected? And not really understanding that probably as good as I should, and that's on me. Just knowing what those multipliers are and making my network work. Because I think that's a big part of this game. Similar to Brass, you have your own network and you got a shared network. So in order to power buildings and that, you can use a shared network, but you're only going to score based on your network. So it's important to find that balance between them. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just think that it adds to that complexity with this game, and you really got to kind of sit down and learn those ways to score the points at the very end. As we talked about that track, should I even go for that one that's way up there? Yeah, I might have some of those buildings, but I'm not going to get up that high. So should I shift my focus and do something else? So
I had a focus, and you just never even built a railroad to it or whatever you need to. So you left me on an island, Pete. I thought we were friends.
I did. Yeah, that's on me.
Well, I think that goes to what when we were talking about Brass. David was talking. I think it was David. Maybe it was you, Pete. Was talking about, hey, I played against somebody that just playing just at a much higher level than, and that's probably the case here at Nucleum. None of us have probably played enough to really be able to get anywhere near that high level to where I don't think you have to do everything. I think you have to recognize for how the game's going, what are the right things, and do enough of the other things to really maximize what is really going to work for you that game. And to be able to see that with everything else going on in the game, I think you got to play it a lot. But I'm guessing there are folks out there that are not going to struggle like we do and be able to really dig into where the intricacies of this game are. I'm never going to get there because we're eventually going to get to the negatives, which maybe we're about ready for.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about splitting some atoms here.
Yeah, I'll start with a basic one. I felt like there was a lot of downtime on this. It's certainly not simultaneous play, but I felt often, because I think there's so many things you can do, there is a potential someone can go into AP or just take a good while on your turn, and if you know what you're going to do, and it comes back to you, and you're like, okay, I'm doing this action, boom, boom, I'm done, and now you're just sitting there waiting again. And it's a long game, very complex, and a lot of downtime. And I just felt like it was way too much downtime for me for the amount of time that game was taking.
If you don't plan out your turns, you can chain a lot of things. And so you're looking across maybe at somebody else, and you're like, wow, they're doing so much on their turn because they're just chaining, and then they're connecting something else, and it triggers this. But if you're playing and you don't chain very well, then I can see how this game is a really long game for you, because you're just doing, 2 actions, or maybe sometimes 1 action if you're putting down track, and you're not, connecting things the way they should be.
My negative on this too is it seems too long for what it's worth. And again, maybe that's the way that we're playing it, as I mentioned before, maybe trying to run up the game, and the game has like 6 different triggers. and 3 of which, I think it's 3, if once we hit that goal, it triggers the end game. So I think there's something to be said there that maybe, again, because of the lack of plays that we have, that we're just not hitting all of those, milestones that we need to really push the game forward and give David all the time in the world to go all the way up to 12 or whatever he can do, and then have that chained reaction where he's getting 500 stars and everything else in there. So I kind of agree. It seems like it's longer than it should be.
And again, we've said it a couple of times, and you just said it again. I think the more you play it, or the more you understand it, the better we're gonna get at that. Or I shouldn't say we, because I don't see me playing this much. Just a little spoiler alert. I think you have to play it enough to get to that point, but I don't know that I want to play it enough to get to that point, because it's a little too much of a struggle for me. And again, too much downtime. The scoring process at the end is, if I said it was tedious, that's being kind. The scoring process at the end, after you've just gone through that long game, now it's a whole other process just to figure out what the scores are. And especially you get to the one where you think you're going to score really well, and then you don't get crap. But that's not the game. That's me. But I feel like there's a lot of things that it's just like, okay, you always say, is the juice worth the squeeze? Yeah. And for me, I enjoy playing the game at times, but then when I'm done, I'm like, I don't think I want to play that again when I'm done.
Let me ask this, David, you've played this a couple times. You've played by yourself, you've played with a group. Is there a right number to play with this to make the game seem to flow a little better? Do you think? Like, I'm just interested in that gameplay with this.
I mean, my answer to that is, I think 3. Okay. I know we played it at 4, but I think 3 is the sweet spot for this game. I think there's a lot of thinking to be done on your turn, so I don't experience the downtime as much as others, and maybe that's because I am trying to chain a lot of things and think about it. And so sometimes, even when we were playing 4 players, it came back to me pretty fast, just because I was trying to think way ahead of what I wanted to actually do and accomplish. My biggest negative, though, about this game is, I know you guys didn't set up this game, but the setup is quite a bear. I mean, I know Pete just talked about brass setup. I'm like, I'll do brass Birmingham setup any day of the week, because this setup is painful. I think that's the biggest negative I have about this, is I don't know how much more I would want to set this game up to play it, because the setup is just that bad.
Is it still on your table?
It's still under my table. That's why I have it up still. The other thing is I don't like about this game is the contracts. I think the contracts are very streaky when they come out. And if you just happen to be lucky that game, you could get contracts that just keep coming out that are like, I could do this and do it in one turn. And other players are looking at there and like, I can't do any of my contracts, and it blocks up your side where, somebody across the table, every time they flip one over, they're like, I already have that one done.
Yeah, that Dave did that. I think he played the whole game. He had contract. Next turn, contract complete. And I had like 3 done totally. And that can get a little frustrating.
Or understanding what the contract actually meant and not playing for the wrong thing.
But I think the contracts can definitely be streaky. I know I saw that complaint a little bit online, because I think there is a random element which we all like. That's why we play games, or so we just play chess. But at the same time, I feel like in this one is very streaky as to when that happened. And that tends to lead to my last point, which is that the scoring, I feel like the times that I've played with the people I've played is never close. Like, the leader is always really far ahead, and everybody else is kind of grouped together towards the back. And I don't know, I've played this game multiple times with, I feel like, different people groups. I've even played against the Anima and stuff like that. It's just never close. I mean, the first player, in my experience, is normally pretty far ahead in this game, whether it be through their gameplay or whatever, and then everybody else is kind of stacked up. And I don't know if that's a problem I would see resolved if I play with other people that play this game a lot more or not, but I always see that there's a huge gap, which is always weird to me, because it's always played out that way.
I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. You only beat me by 100 points. Don't worry, I'm here to make everybody feel good as the caboose.
Well, I think you guys lapped me the one game. It felt like I was in the lead, at least.
No, when we were doing that final scoring and everybody's just moving further and further away. Brutal.
So we're putting this up against brass when we're about to do a battle of the funnest. There are a couple things. I think you look at Nucleum. I haven't read anything that said it, but it feels like they took brass and then they changed some things. And I feel like you described Nucleum as brass on steroids. There's a lot of shared DNA. Then there's also some reverse DNA. And so I'm curious on you guys' takes. I wrote a few things down here. In Nucleum, you can't use other people's uranium, right? You have to use your own, and that's it. why should I think I should be able to use other people's uranium? I don't know. When I think about it, it's like, well, yeah, it's not your uranium. But after I played brass, I'm like, well, I feel like I should be able to just go take uranium, and why can't I? And then the other thing that is almost like a complete reversal, in brass, you can't build a canal or a rail unless it's connected to your network. But in Nucleum, you can build your rails anywhere, but your city has to be part of your network. Completely opposite. I feel like, okay, yeah, we're copying brass, but we're going to do it opposite. I'm not sure which one of those I like, but I like being able to put my rails down wherever. I didn't like not being able to just get Nucleum from wherever I wanted to. And so I guess I'm just curious. They're different games. Obviously, they can do it, but they're also very, very similar, and these are just kind of reverses.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is in brass, in the second era especially, you can build in an area where you don't have a network, provided you can get the resource that you need to build there, and you have the city.
The city, yes.
The city. So, that gets you in that direction, and then you really have to connect up that, your network. Yeah, it's great to have your own network, but it's not as important as it is in Nucleum, where I think your network is really what matters. Once we get connected, other than, trying to sprawl out a little bit, we start sharing that coal, iron's available all the time. So I think there is a little distinction between the two, but I think that's where that DNA, they kind of share that. And I think the thing that throws me off in Nucleum is just being able to build anywhere. You just drop a tile down anywhere. And again, Daniela mentioned, that I wasn't willing to go and connect up her part.
Thanks.
Well, I think in the long run, that really hurt me because, again, it was important to get that full network up and running. And, you want to leverage that so you can get the whole engine going. And, you can't be stingy and selfish with your network trying to, well, this is my network. I don't want anybody in on it.
You'll learn for next time.
Yeah. You got to kind of find out what that balance is.
Yeah.
I felt like when we play brass, beer is something that either you love it or you hate it. And I wish that, I like the fact that nobody can steal my uranium. It kind of feels nice when you're working out the math sometimes to say, hey, I know Chris can't just come in and swoop this to make a sale or something like that. But I don't know. I think there has to be, I don't necessarily like either system. I want there to be something where it's like, hey, if I build beer, maybe I get one that I can put on my player mat and then here's 2 free ones or something. Because I like that there's an open system, but sometimes I feel like that is, with Birmingham, that's the thing that leads me to a lot of frustration is that I can't, I'm building it, but I'm just building it for other people. So then you either have games where it's mass produced or games where it's like nobody's building it because nobody wants to share it because we're all too linked up. And then the game is just a struggle to score points. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that, but anyways.
Yeah, I think with Nucleum, you do have your own resources, but you do need to share that processing plant. And I think that's kind of where that balance comes in. You need to power something that has 13. You may have the Nucleum, but you need processing plants in order to process it, which I think adds that complexity that I think is just a little bit too much for me.
Yeah, so coming back to Daniela's point, though, this game right now on Amazon, I would not recommend buying it for this price, but for whatever reason, today, it's $103.99. So somebody is scalping the market here. Maybe that's just because the normal supplier there is not in play, but that's really pricey. You can find this game on board game websites and even like your local shops. It should go somewhere between $56 to $65 is what we're seeing on average. On the secondary market for Nucleum right now, it's anywhere between $40 and $50 is what I'm seeing this game. And you do get a lot of components in this game. There's a lot of stuff that comes with it. But $103.99 right now from Amazon, I would say stay away. Go to your local places. I mean, go to your local places anyways. But if you're at a game desert where you can't buy any board games and Amazon is your main plug, I would say stay away for right now because there's going to be somebody else that's going to bring it for closer to what the market is bearing, which is around $56 to $65 at a real board game store.
Well, as far as, deluxifying Nucleum game, there really isn't a lot to enhance the game with. I think you could probably 3D print some of the towers, the power plants that they have there. I know the coal is little chips that they have, so you could bump it up a little bit if you wanted to kind of be a little bit more thematic on that. But I mean, overall, the production value of the game is really good. The cards, or not necessarily the cards, but the punch boards are really very clear and vibrant. So I think you're pretty good with what it is. It's going to be a looker without even deluxifying the game much.
Yeah, I can envision like maybe you have uranium tokens that glow in the dark, but if you're playing in the dark, you probably got other issues. That's just more so knowing that happens if you can do that. With respect to my final thoughts, I don't have a huge amount to say. I'll get into a few things when we're comparing these two. The first time I played Nucleum, and we've talked about this before, we left and we were texting each other the next day. I was like, hey, did you spend all night thinking about this? And I think most of us did. We came back. I was excited about the second game. I didn't have that feeling after the second game. And I think I can see where this would be a good game. The more you play it, as I said, I'm just not sure I want to play it enough to get to that point.
All right. Well, I think we're done combusting coal and splitting atoms and exploring this life of Nucleum. Let's head on to our Battle of the Funnest.
All right, everyone, the moment of truth has arrived. It's time to separate the men from the boys, or more appropriately, the games from the toys. We're pitting these games head-to-head against each other in the ultimate face-off. In one corner, weighing in at 3.87 out of 5, with an overall BGG rating of 8.6, forged from iron during England's Industrial Revolution, manufacturing fun like a 19th century cotton mill, the king of canals, the ruler of rails, Britain's biggest bruiser buying beer from Belper to Burton, Brass Birmingham. In the other corner, weighing in at 4.13 out of 5, with an overall BGG rating of 8.2, accused of blasphemy in the Kingdom of Saxony, surpassing coal for the goal of the soul energy roll, bombarding your cranium while converting uranium, eccentric, eclectic, and downright electric, the proclaimed provider of radioactive recreation, Nucleum. And now let's find out who has the bigger network in our Battle of the Funnest Showdown. All right, guys, you know how this works. We're going to evaluate these games head-to-head in 5 different categories: theme and production, mechanisms, value for your time, replayability, and the fun factor. We'll each choose which game we think outdoes the others in each category. The most category winners takes the whole pot. So let's find out who takes the prize in our Battle of the Funnest. We will start with theme and production. I'm going to start with David.
I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier. I do like a more colorful board. I think they're both thematic. It's just what stands out to me on a table. I think both their productions were really good, so I don't have an issue with that. And theme-wise, I just kind of like the weird science. I like the steampunk thing, so I'm going to go with Nucleum on this one. Going over to Pete.
Yeah, this one's a tough one for me, too. There's positives on each side. I really like the vibrance of the board in Nucleum, but I also like the theme, and I think that really comes through with Brass. The production value, as we said, great production value either way that you go. I'm just going to kind of lean towards Brass just because I feel like I'm actually back in that time and really trying to go through that Industrial Revolution, where with Nucleum, I feel it's more mechanical and I'm not getting that theme come through to me so much. So I'm going to go with Brass, and I will go to Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to actually go with Nucleum, even though I think you can tell from my comments I like Brass better. When I'm looking at theme and production, I feel like Nucleum maybe is a theme that speaks to me a little bit more, and just the production. Brass is nice, but it's really nothing special from a production standpoint. They threw the barrels in there as the one thing that isn't a cube or a chit. Not that there's anything amazing about Nucleum, but there are some really cool boards and the way things fit together. I thought the production was really well done in Nucleum, so I'm going to actually go with Nucleum there, which means that Nucleum squeaks out a victory 2-1 in theme and production and takes a 1-0 lead. We'll switch now to mechanisms, and I'll kick it back to Pete.
Yeah, I really like the card play in Brass Birmingham a little bit better than I like the tiles and that action selection that we have in Nucleum. Those are really the two main components for me when I'm doing my action. Everything involves either the cards or those tiles. I'm going to go with Brass Birmingham just because I enjoy the card play a little bit better. David?
Yeah, this one's tough for me. Just kind of like Pete was saying, just thinking about all the different mechanisms. I feel like Nucleum has a lot of different mechanisms that kind of fit in this puzzle, where Birmingham has a set amount, but what it does really well at a high level. And I think when I look at both of those, which one do I like? Do I like more, or do I like something that is just done really well and is really refined? And so for me, you could probably flip a coin either day. I might pick something different, but in this day, I am going to pick Brass Birmingham on this one. The refinedness of the mechanisms and just how they play make the game what it is. And sometimes you don't need more. You just need to do what you have well. Chris.
I agree with everything that you said, but I'm still going to go with Nucleum. I'm surprising myself in the way I'm voting here because I agree. I probably think Nucleum has maybe a few too many mechanisms, but I also think there are some pretty cool ones. And I really like the actions that can also be the rails, and the way even when you play a rail, you can use it for the actions, but you got to line them up right. And I think that's really cool, and I think that's really well done. Doesn't matter because Brass still wins the category and ties it up 1-1, but I'll still go with Nucleum on mechanisms. We'll go to value for your time. I'll start with this one. I'm going to go straight off with Brass, so this is my first vote for Brass. Again, I just feel like there's too much downtime in Nucleum. Not that there isn't in Brass, but I never feel that way when I'm playing Brass, and so that's all I really have to say about that. David?
I'm also going to go with Birmingham. I like that there's a set amount of rounds. I know pretty much what the length of the game is probably going to be just by the players that I'm sitting with, just because I know how it ends every time. I do like that there's a variable ending with Nucleum, but when I compare the two and just look at how much time, especially setup time and teardown time, when you're talking all of that put together, I get way better value for my time with Birmingham, even though I know Pete thinks it's a lengthy setup. I'm going to let you set up Nucleum next time. You'll be like, I love Brass. It's so easy to set up. Over to Pete.
Yeah, we're going to sweep this one. Brass is going to be just a better value for my time. I know what I'm getting into. It's not overly complex. The scoring is relatively straightforward at the end. I'm always engaged in the play, figuring out what's going on. Brass Birmingham.
All right, so 3-0 Brass Birmingham takes value for your time. We'll go to replayability and back to Pete.
Yeah, this one I'm actually going to switch over to Nucleum. I think there is just so many variables with this game. Just the variable setup, the variable player powers, the different options that you have throughout the game. I think there's a lot more to explore. David, mentioned Brass. It's straightforward and it's a honed machine. But as far as, the replayability, I know what I'm getting into in Brass. I know what my, some strategies are. I know there's going to be some variability there, but I just feel like Nucleum just kind of gives you way more options with the game. So I am going to go back to Chris.
Yeah, I'm also going to go with Nucleum here. I feel like Brass, whenever I play it, I'm always coming in and saying, I'm going to try to start doing this, and then I'll adjust if I can't do that. Nucleum puts a lot of things in front of you. It has the variable player powers or player abilities when you're getting your different boards. That adds a lot to it. For me, it's just Nucleum without a doubt on replayability. But David may disagree. We'll check it out.
I'm going to agree with you guys. I think when I think of replayability, Nucleum, I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface. I've been trying to play it. It's underneath my vault right now, so I've been playing it a lot, but I still feel like I haven't scratched the surface on it. There's just so many factors and ways you can take it, and you want to see, hey, does this strategy work? Kind of like Pete was saying earlier. If I go down this rabbit hole, can it actually be productive? And it takes a whole game to play it, and then you got to reset it for another 45 minutes. But hey, replayability is great, so I'm going to go with Nucleum.
All right, so Nucleum sweeps that 3-0, tying it up with Brass 2-2 in categories, 6-6 in votes. So we're coming into the final category here, all tied up literally. The final category is Fun Factor. We put it last for a reason. I think it's important that a game is fun. Let's find out which one we think is the most fun. David, coming right back to you. Fun Factor, Brass, or Nucleum?
Yeah, so right now in my plays and everything else, I am going to have to go with Birmingham on this one. Brass Birmingham takes it for me on Fun Factor. There's just so many good times I have with it, with the people I played with it, and I know what I'm getting into. It's kind of like Pete was saying, it's a well-honed machine. I know when I sit down at the table, I can just plug and play because I played it so much. With Nucleum, I feel like I'm still at the stage where a lot of my game group, they haven't played it a lot, so you're still teaching and you're not able to just focus on what you want to do. Where I feel like with Birmingham, I just have so many good, fun memories of it right now. So for me, it's that. I'm going to kick it over to Chris.
Yeah, I am going to make Pete Mr. Irrelevant because I am actually going to go with Brass as well for the fun factor. We'll see what Pete has to say, but yeah, for me, I look forward to playing Brass. I was looking forward to playing Nucleum after the first time. I'm not now. It's enjoyable. I just don't know that it's fun, and it's really heavy. And so if I'm not getting a lot of fun out of something that's really heavy, I'm probably going to avoid it. I'm going to go with Brass. We'll still listen to what Pete has to say with half of our ear.
Well, you guys are correct. Brass is the really the fun game here. When I play Nucleum, I feel like I'm looking for the fun. It's not coming to me. When I play Brass, what I'm doing is fun. Every bit of it, whether I'm, taking somebody's beer or, getting that location that somebody needed. It's just always fun to me. I don't think I've had a bad play of Brass. So Brass Birmingham, fun factor all the way for me.
All right, so fun factor, another sweep, in this case for Brass. And there you have it, folks. With the score of 3-2, Brass Birmingham rides the rails to victory in today's Battle of the Funnest.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of yet another episode of the Fifth Meeple Board Game Podcast. We hope you enjoyed everything that we were talking about today in beer and coal and atoms and pottery. If you'd like to get in touch with us, just email us at thefifthmeeple@gmail.com or give us a shout out on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Peace out.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
See ya.
I feel like I'm hearing something in the background.
No,
I'm good.
Okay, the sugar's finally kicking in. Never mind.
Pacemaker. Oh, yeah, you're not doing the intros.
I
Okay.
don't have the summaries.
You little solo mode
Yeah.
Dorcas.
Analysis per layout.
Across, and I'm like, oh,
All right, Chris, thank you for that introduction to Nucleum. Wow, easy for me to say.
And now let's find out who... the clap in the background.
just trying to time that right.
Yeah.